one of the faces of A&E's hit TV show, Hoarders. That's right, Hoarders. Brandon Broni. Let's get started with this hit show, Hoarders, because I've called my wife a hoarder. Last night she said, "Don't you ever call me a hoarder again."
Most often, the night before we arrive at the home is the most challenging, most difficult, most embarrassing, most shameful moment of their life because they're now allowing themselves to be vulnerable. If I were a crime scene investigator, if I was a homicide investigator, would you want to move the body around before I get there?
Right.
So for me, you learn more about a person from their home than any other facet of their life. What percentage do you think of the clients that we receive phone calls actually refer to themselves as actual hoarders? Would you guess?
I would say zero. I would think nobody would acknowledge they have a problem. It's just like an alcoholic wouldn't acknowledge they had an addiction. No addiction person, crackhead, wouldn't say they got a problem. So nobody who has a problem will acknowledge that. My guest is America's life transition expert, one of the faces of A&E's hit TV show, Hoarders. That's right, Hoarders. He's the founder of Life Cycle Transitions, the first company of its kind to blend emotional, logistical, and real estate support for families facing crisis-level home situations. From hoarding and inherited homes to addiction, mental health, and elder care, he has helped thousands of people reclaim their lives and dignity through compassionate action. Please welcome to Money Making Conversations Masterclass, Brandon Broni. How you doing, Brandon?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, sir. Let's get started with this hit show, Hoarders, because I've called my wife a hoarder. And she saw the show last night. She said, "Don't you ever call me a hoarder again. I am not that." So my question to you, Brandon, is when people use the word hoarder in general, like I've threw at my wife, what exactly is a hoarder?
Well, that's an interesting question. What the word hoarding has done is it's given a face to a much deeper mental health issue.
Okay.
In fact, a much deeper mental health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is what manifests itself in the physical form, that what people are dealing with, going through, and experiencing, but most importantly, what they're suffering from shows itself in the physical. And a lot of that is in the accumulation of the inability to let go of the past traumas or experiences.
Now, how do you get there, though? Let me back up a little bit. Okay.
Uh-huh.
How do you, as an expert, see the problem before they acknowledge the problem?
Well, that's good. I mean, that's a twofold question. One, I get calls all the time when clients want us to come in and do an evaluation assessment. And most often, the night before we arrive at the home is the most challenging, most difficult, most embarrassing, most shameful moment of their life because they're now allowing themselves to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing they try to do is tidy up and clean up because
Right.
like think about it. When you got people coming over your house, how many of us have thrown a bunch of things in the closet? You open the closet, things just sort of fall on top of you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with my clients, what I try to explain to them is that, and without being morbid, because this may sound a little bit morbid, but if I were a crime scene investigator,
Mm-hmm.
if I was a homicide investigator, would you want to move the body around before I get there?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So for me, you learn more about a person from their home than any other facet of their life.
When you used in the word life transition, what does that mean in your terms?
Well, it's all encompassing. It's holistic. It's everything they're dealing with mentally, physically, emotionally, and financially. In most of the cases, their home is their biggest asset. So you can't, when you're dealing with that home and you're trying to decide to sell a home, fix a home, or move from a home, there's a lot that goes into that decision-making process that meets the eye.
I watch television, and
Uh-huh.
television is edited. And
Mhm.
so, like you said, a day before, people know you're coming, they try to clean up, you walk in there, still a disaster. Okay.
Yeah.
And you said, Rushion, hey, if it's a crime scene, you don't move the body, they have to come in and investigate. Now, people who call on you
Uh-huh.
to come to these places, what is that conversation like, Brandon?
Okay. Well, let me tie into that crime scene question because I was going somewhere with that. The reason I don't want them to get rid of their things and to move their things because you learn so much from what they're doing. Why they're doing what they're doing and how they're functioning in their home gives me the ability to take from it, which is the mental health and the illness, and to learn from it so that we can grow from it and move past and heal from it. Because when people go through that trauma, they're doing things unbeknownst to them in their personal space that they aren't aware of. And like the real world, you go to work and you function and you're high functioning, you're professional, you're productive. But when you go home, that's when that mask is taken off. That's when
Hmm.
you can sort of be your most authentic self. And that's why, violating people's home is so detrimental, because it's the only place in the world where people can feel safe. So when I tie back into what you're saying, going into these environments and trying to figure out why they do what they do and how they do what they do and why they're nervous is because they don't know who's coming in that door. They don't know what questions I'm going to ask, and they're not really at that point sure how much they want to reveal.
Right.
So it's a cat and mouse game.
Right. And a game that we have to get to the bottom line because they do have a problem that they may not be acknowledging. I'm talking to Brandon Broni. He's the America's Life Transition Expert, one of the faces of A&E's hit TV show Hoarders. I guess I got to start right there. A TV show. How did you get involved, Brandon?
Well, I started when we first started. We were a property preservation company, and we were working with dilapidated, distressed properties and getting them on the market. As we were going in and out of these houses during the country's most vulnerable time during the housing crisis, we began to see idiosyncrasies or patterns. And I said, what if there was a company that can sort of help people mentally, physically, and emotionally through all these different situations that I was experiencing? So we started to see more often people with an accumulation of life in their home, like a bunch of things, knickknacks, and what
Brandon,
worth
stop.
of.
Accumulation. See, you're so nice. Okay. I don't see life when I watch TV. I see
Well,
junk. I see trash. I see unlivable conditions. But you say accumulation of life. Now,
well,
that's a very professional term for what you see.
Well, the reason I say that though, Mr. McDonald, is because if you've heard the terminology a well lived in home, right? This is a home that's probably generationally passed through grandma home and
Right.
inherited from that point on. So there's a life. There's a lot of life in there. And also when you get over the age of 60, unfortunately, there's a lot that goes on in a person's life. There's
Right.
family members that pass on,
Right.
there's parents that pass on. And what's the first thing people do when that happens? They go over to the home and they start taking things. And guess what? That's where the hoarding begins, is when you go into your loved one's home and you don't see junk, you don't see this, you see the memories.
My number one thought is it has to be some form of isolation with these people because people don't visit them and they don't make note of it. And, because if I'm visiting somebody's house and I see something, quite frankly, I will comment and go, what's going on here?
Mhm.
What is the, I guess, the MO of of the typical hoarder lifestyle?
I would say that most of them are high functioning. That's the common denominator, and it's funny because we originated in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So if you can imagine, my pool of clients are some of the most gifted, most intelligent, most educated people in the
Mm.
world, and I had to go into their environment, and a lot of them were more educated, probably more abreast of things in a specific segment than I was, and I had to dummy down a lot of those conversations because it didn't negate the fact that you got a bunch of junk or trash or whatever in your home. So you can be a rocket scientist, you can be an MIT, you can be an MIT professor or a Harvard graduate, but right now none of that's serving you. In fact, is serving against you. So a lot of them are highly intelligent people. Some of them are on the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
and we're starting to realize that there are quite a few people that are highly intelligent and mental health sort of paralleling or going in between those two spectrums. Some of them have not been married before, some of them have. But one
Mm-hmm.
thing I do know is that when they are married, that this creates a huge wedge in their marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them do end up, unfortunately, dealing with marital status issues and
Right.
divorce as a
Mm-hmm.
result of this.
When I was going through your questions for the show, I ran across a question that said TEA. Explain to my audience why you feel that's a good place to start.
Well, I started the TEA program, which is Transition Evaluation Assessment, about 17 years ago, because I needed a guiding tool in order to really break down a lot of what's going on in people's lives, financially, mentally, emotionally, physically, and come up with a blueprint. Because let's face it, you don't know what you don't know until you know. And a lot of times when I preface the idea, when I talk to people, do you want to stay in this home or are you looking to downsize or relocate? I'll give you three options. You want to stay, let's make it so that it's is livable. If you want to put it on the market, let's make it so that you can sell it for the highest retail value. And then option three, if you don't have the time, money, energy, and resource, we have a home rescue program where we can get you out from under this and find you a home anywhere in the country in 30, 60, and 90 days, full spectrum. And we'll front load all the money and everything that's required. We'll bet on our ability to make your situation work for you. And immediately red flags. Clients say, no, I'm not selling my home. I'm not doing this. But guess what? As we did the evaluation assessment and they started to see things that they didn't see, some clients would see that they couldn't afford to live anywhere else because the cost of rent and expenses was just too high. So they were going to have to live with some of those things that maybe were challenging before and just pare them down over the period of time. And we would help them do it either through our monthly help plan or either through dealing with one thing at a time or dealing with the hoarding over a longer period of time. But we would say the best plan for you is to stay here. Some clients that would immediately raise their hand and say, I'm out of here. I don't want to I don't want to leave. I don't want to sell my house. I'm staying here. But after we looked at the plumbing, the electrical, the mold, the hoarding cleanup, the roof falling apart, and we broke down comparable analysis as to what the home is worth in its current condition and what it's going to take in order for it to sell and get past an FHA, Fannie Mae inspection that a 30-year mortgage can be granted to the buyer. They didn't want to spend the 60, 80, or 50 or 20 or whatever thousands of dollars. And they were like, look, I want to get out of here. I'm done. So the evaluation assessment, the transition evaluation assessment is a tool to really get down to the nuts and bolts of what's really happening and what they really need to do. And nobody in the market has done it. And it's been sequential in me being able to transition over 7,000 people in the past 17 years.
Now, that's a large number. So now that allows me to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
From a racial standpoint, just got to know, because you're a black man. And I don't, and that already kind of like a black man doing this, call me stereotypical, because I would think I'll be interviewing a white person doing this, because it feels like this is a area that will be dominated by whites. What of the 7,000 from a racial component and from an age component? We talked about the intellect earlier because you said you started in Massachusetts, but from a racial component and an age component, what is the typical hoarder?
Studies are still gathering. We're still gathering studies. One thing, hoarding has a high recidivism rate of about 65 to 70%. That we know. In terms of my clients and life cycle, I would say about 80% of my clients might be Caucasian.
Okay.
And then there's the other percentage that sort of goes between different races and so forth. Socioeconomically, I don't think money has a variance. There is one common denominator that we cannot deny and we can't lie, is that in order for me to help a lot of these clients, they have to have a home.
Right.
So when you look at that definition of that number, I think it's kind of a little jaded when you may have to look at another number and say, well, how many Americans are homeowners in this country? Because that would have to play a role in being able to look at those numbers unbiasedly. But unfortunately, the number one common denominator is that there is a home, and that home, unfortunately, has either been neglected or hoarded, or there's some trauma or some issues going on within those four walls.
And the age range would be what?
I'm actually getting calls from clients that are suffering from hoarding at 17, 18.
Wow.
We're getting a lot of calls from parents and actual parents calling about their daughter and their son's room. It's a lot more common than I think most people do. And when I tell people that you put a name or a face on this disease, it's a lot more intricate than that. I used to think, like, when you say the word, it's like saying crazy and just crazy. No, there's different variations of crazy, and people are crazy for different reasons. Sometimes it's because you're making them crazy, jokingly.
Absolutely. And I know that word crazy, we can laugh at it, and but It's a word I grew up saying, "You crazy dude, you crazy dude." And we have to take a step back and realize that it's a lot deeper with the mental situation and the people coming forth with their acknowledging their mental situation. But I'm talking to Brandon Broni. If you watch the show Hoarders, I'm talking to him, my man, one of the key experts in this hit TV show. But he's the founder of Life Cycle Transition. It's the first company of its kind to blend emotional, logistical, and real estate support for families facing crisis level home situations. Like you just mentioned, teenagers are now dealing with hoarders, and parents are now acknowledging that. And when you get to that point, what don't we see on TV that is shown on TV? I guess I have to ask, because TV is a production, but you call in, there's an end game, because you're not there to just do a production. You're also there to rescue people. So
Yeah.
talk
I'm
to
sorry, go ahead.
No, just talk to us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing too, just to sort of piggyback on our previous conversation, what percentage do you think of the clients that we receive phone calls actually refer to themselves as actual hoarders? Would you guess?
I would say zero. I would think nobody would acknowledge they have a problem. It's like an alcoholic wouldn't acknowledge they had an addiction. No addiction person, crackhead, wouldn't say they got a problem. So nobody who has a problem will acknowledge that.
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge right there, is the fact that very few people have ever called in. I mean, we do. And let me tell you when that happens, why that happens. Well, I do get calls from people saying, "Hi, I'm Rushion and I'm a hoarder and I need assistance with my home. Enough is enough and I'm ready for a change."
Wow.
But what I didn't know is what it took for them to get to that point. And I would literally go into people's homes and they would have at least 3 or 4 times, I would go into their home and I would sit in their living room and I would see a brochure of ours from 10 years ago on their refrigerator. In one particular instance, an older couple said, "Brandy, you know what? Every morning, me and my husband, we make a cup of coffee and make some tea and we sit down and we point at your brochure and we say, today's going to be the day that we call you." That's a reality of sorts. People do that. They're to acknowledge themselves as being a hoarder is not like being, schizophrenic or bipolar. Being mentally ill is so hard. So when you're trying to combat it, we're trying to come up with intentional measures so that people can not buy things, don't collect things, get rid of things. You're fighting from multiple different spectrums. And most importantly, you're fighting against themselves. You're fighting them in that process, and they're wanting to fight you back.
So how does one get in touch with you? Because, like I said, this is what you do for a living. The
Yes,
television
they can.
show is just an extension of what
Oh
you
yeah,
do, correct?
absolutely. They can get a hold of us at lifecycletransitions.com. You can send us an email with any inquiries at info@lifecycletransitions.com.
Now, they send an email to you. Let's go through the
Mhm.
steps. Let's go through the
Uh,
steps.
They send an email over to us. We get the information. We evaluate the questions. We'll get on the phone call, do a Zoom call if we can. In some cases, a lot of these clients, like I told you before, some clients stalk us for years. So they'll fill a form out and then we'll have to chase them for an enormous amount of time until finally they pick up the phone. So they pick up a phone in a perfect situation. We'll talk to them on the phone. We'll schedule an in-home evaluation assessment to go out and meet with them. If they're not comfortable letting us in the home because they're still not quite sure, Rashawn, that they're 100% comfortable, then we would recommend and suggest do a video, take some pictures,
Mm-hmm.
tour the home. If they're not comfortable with that, I created the very first of its own kind, which is our easy exit, zero contact. That's it.
Mm.
Easy exit, zero contact. That means we go into actual hoarding situations with clients that are too ashamed, too embarrassed to deal with being present while these hoarding projects are done, where we'll actually do the entire project without them physically being there.
Wow.
Under certain conditions. Those conditions are, even though the embarrassment of standing over a lot of these things is too painful, that we want you to go into some of our therapy programs so you can speak with a counselor and agree to do our transition care plan, where after we do the cleanup, we come in every week or every 2 weeks. Once the embarrassment, the shame, and all those things are out of the equation, now it's time to get right into the healing.
Okay, let's talk about that then, because you're using the word embarrassment and shame, and they are a hoarder. When does the word embarrassment or the feeling of shame come into play, Brandon, in this conversation? Because they are living this lifestyle. Like I said, pretty much they're probably by themselves or they don't have many visitors just come by to make comments about it. When does the embarrassment and shame come into play? When it's acknowledged that they need to get it done and you're sitting there revealing to them the problem? When does it happen?
I would say 10, 15 years ago. On average, a lot of our transition projects are 5, 10 years in the making. For every 1 year that a client goes without addressing the hoarding conditions in their home, it's equivalent to about 1 day of actual cleanup between 2 to 3 technicians doing decluttering, separating, sorting, organizing, haul away, and cleaning. So if you let two years go by, just think 2 days. And if you're thinking 15, 10 years, then you can just add that into the equation also.
Wow. Again, education for me and also for my audience, because you are a small business owner, you're an entrepreneur. You've developed this business. And did this business, was this what you,
No.
was this the end game? I'm not talking about the TV show.
Well, I'm a very spiritual person. And I'm going to be honest, when we first started this business, we started it as sort of like a one-stop shop. You know, we had these contracts from the largest housing entities in the country, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and we were contracted to do decluttering, separating, renovating, all this miscellaneous things. So I wanted a one-stop shop to offer those services. And then I said, what if we can take that to people dealing with things mentally, physically, mentally, and emotionally? But then that plan, as I said, spiritually changed because I had a plan of being a company that just offered great service to great people. But God had a plan and he said, no, you're going to save lives and change them. And that was when the turning point realized that I couldn't, that you touch everything, Rushion, that touches you. When you go into people's lives, you are responsible to making sure that they're okay. And that means that you have to bite off a lot more.
Now, let me ask you this question. How exactly do you work alongside realtors when a home has to be restored?
Well, we have a whole host of partners, and realtors specifically are our anchors. You know, and we vet them, rigorously. We check their background. We know exactly who they are, what kind of work they've done. We look at their reviews, and once we vet them and we go through this process, we certify them as life cycle realtors. Particularly when we're doing our transition evaluation assessment, we need facts in that town on that block that can support Mrs. Smith or Mr. Brown deciding to do whether to fix their home up and renovate it or to exit it because it's just not enough meat on that bone from an equity standpoint. We want to know all of these things make sense and to the bottom line.
You are special. You're doing some unique work from a mental standpoint. You're not only this when it's, in other words, when the light goes off or they say cut, you still out there hustling. You still out there doing, like you say, God's work, saving lives. That has to make you feel good at night.
It does, it does. And I'm obviously, I'm gonna be 100% honest. It has its ups and downs because sometimes you feel the fatigue, mental health, caretaker burnout, all of these things were things that we came across when we were experiencing. When I tell you, I've transitioned over 7,000 people. What I didn't tell you is that I've been in the homes of even more thousands of people. And I remember in my heart, the ones that I couldn't save, the ones that were too stubborn or just not ready, or they died or passed away, or the evaluations that I've done with clients with their entire family in a living room and having these conversations. And then at the end of that conversation, they're not ready to do it. And then I can tell you hundreds of those cases where they call me later when that person passes on and say, my mom passed away, Brandon, can you now come out and can we now deal with this issue? Because what the hoarding doesn't tell in on the TV, like you mentioned earlier, is that people are dying in these environments. They're dying from respiratory, pulmonary complications, trip hazards, and fire hazards. When I got our first contract, it was from the largest healthcare provider in the Northeast. It was Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim. They gave me that contract because they knew something that we didn't know 10 years, 20 years prior, and that it was in indoor environmental conditions were compromising individuals' health from a respiratory standpoint chronically. These are people who think they have allergies, think they got asthma, think they have all these things, But in reality, their home is killing them. And what we realized is that what I did when I did the mental health, and I can go into that, but when I created our mold remediation division, it was because when there's smoke, there's fire. And when there's hoarding, there's often mold. And the reason that is because when there's an accumulation of anything, you don't know what's behind those walls brewing. When the pipes are broken, when the roof is falling apart, these clients, Rashawn, when they have uh, HVAC issues, when they're having complications with their roof because of the embarrassment and the shame, they go without heat. They go without running water. So when those things accumulate to the tune that they are, they reach a point of no return where the distance of continuing to normalcy and reality is just too far removed for them, that they suffer and they unfortunately die in these environments. So for me, this was an humanitarian objective and a goal of mine to save lives and change them, because if I didn't do it, nobody else was. When I went to the realtors and I said, work with me, they wanted to do their own thing. When I went to contractors and tradesmen and said, go into contract with me. When I went into the mold remediation business and said, we need to do this. Or when I went to the mental health therapist for 5 to 7 years, pounding down their doors saying, we're cleaning these houses out, but that's not enough. This client here needs more help. Can you help me? And they shut their doors on me because they wanted to know how they were going to get paid. They wanted to know how this was going to happen. They wanted to know if my clients had a college degree. And I said, enough is enough. We're going to start our own mental health division. We're going to start our own mold remediation. We're going to get realtors that are going to abide by our rules of ethics. And we're going to build this ecosystem that we can do what most companies or most clients would take 9 or 10 or 9 months to do in 30 days. That was a goal of mine.
I'm going to tell you something, brother. As we get deeper into this interview, Brandon, I'm more impressed by you because, what you don't know, you don't know. And you're bigger than the TV show. The TV show is just a great part of your branding. But Life Cycle Transition is you. It has grown from you to more than 200 experts. How did that happen?
It happened one day at a time. I mean, the first one day at a time. Listen, the first 8 years I was in business, I didn't make a penny. And and my wife was telling me we should shut the doors. I didn't make a penny because I didn't figure out how to learn what I didn't know. So we went through trial and error. I created a concept of a transition company that had no advertisement vertical or category to fit. I had to go on Yellow Book, Yellow Pages, and all these categories and advertise under landscaping, carpentry, cleaning. And then I had to go through the painstaking process, Rashawn, of asking them these questions. Why are you doing this? So I went the long way. And, 17 years later now, we're the number 2 hoarding company in the country, and we're the most visible company out. We're more visible than Yelp and a number of other big companies that are venture capital funded. They got Silicon Valley money. They're a franchise, and this is privately owned based on my sacrifice and my family's sacrifice to keep pushing.
Thank you for coming on Money Making Conversation Masterclass, my friend. It's been a blessing and an honor to interview you. I say that very seriously because I heard and I see the passion in you, and it is God's work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It means a lot to be here, and your work is amazing as well. And I'll love to be back here anytime in the future. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you.